The letter arrived with a circuit rider, tucked between a notice of auction and an old newspaper from Cheyenne. Eli Thorne turned it over in his rough hands. The paper was thin, the kind that tore if you breathed too hard, and the handwriting was small, careful, and almost afraid to take up space. Mr. Elijah Thorne, Solitude, Wyoming Territory. He waited until the supper dishes were washed and the fire was down to a quiet glow before opening it. The wind outside pushed against the cabin walls, crying through the cracks like a living thing. It was a lonely sound for a lonely man. 2 years had passed since he'd buried Martha. 2 years since laughter had lived inside this house. The silence had grown heavy, so heavy he'd done something desperate one night. He'd written a notice. Homesteader 35 seeks a wife. Must be of strong constitution and willing to work. I have 160 acres, a sturdy home, and no debts. I offer an honest name and protection. He hadn't mentioned the ache in his chest or how the silence pressed on him until it felt like punishment. He hadn't said that what he really wanted was someone to share the sound of the wind with. Now, he hailed a reply. Mr. Thorne, I have seen your notice. I am 24 years of age, an orphan, and have worked for hire since I was a girl. I am in good health. I can cook, clean, mend, and tend a garden. I am not given to idle chatter. I ask only for a place to live in exchange for my labor. If this is agreeable, I will take the next westbound stagecoach. Clara May Brooks. Eli read it 3 times. No warmth, no flirtation, no curiosity. It wasn't the letter of a hopeful bride. It was a quiet plea for safety, written in the plainest possible words. He folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The decision was made. For 2 weeks, Eli prepared. He cleared out what had once been Martha's sewing room, then a storage place for things he couldn't bear to throw away. He scrubbed the floor, patched a drafty spot near the window, and laid out one of Martha's quilts on the bed, faded blue stars against cream. He stood in the doorway when he was done, wondering if this room would be a refuge for the woman who was coming, or a prison she couldn't escape. His ranch sat high in the Laramie foothills, a patch of meadow and pines surrounded by rock and wind, beautiful in summer, brutal in winter. A place that demanded strength. He hoped Clara Brooks had enough of it. The day the stage rolled into Solitude, Eli rode into town on his gelding, Dusty. The town was little more than a wide trail with a saloon, a general store, and a few weathered houses. He tied Dusty to the post and waited. The locals watched him the way they always did, a mix of curiosity and distance. He'd been the quiet widower too long for gossip not to stick. The stagecoach came with a clatter of wheels and a hiss of steam, stopping in a cloud of dust. The driver climbed down, stretched, and then nodded toward the door. "Got one for you, Thorne," he said. She stepped down slowly, not like a bride arriving to start a new life, but like a prisoner stepping out into uncertain light. Her dress was plain gray, her shoes scuffed, and her brown hair pulled so tight it strained at her temples. Her face was pale, her eyes a washed-out blue-gray, the color of a winter sky before a storm. She looked around without really seeing anything. She was not beautiful in the way people expected a bride to be, but she was, striking, like a ghost of someone who'd lived through too much. "Miss Brooks?" Eli asked quietly. She stiffened at the sound of his voice, then turned toward him. Her expression didn't change. "Mr. Thorne," she answered. Her voice was soft, steady, and utterly without color. "Welcome to Solitude," he said, taking her small carpetbag. "Allow me." For a moment her fingers tightened on the handle as if she couldn't let it go. Then she released it, quick and wary, like someone touching a hot iron. He didn't react, just lifted the bag and led her to his wagon. Behind them, he heard the whispers. "Lord have mercy," Agnes Miller hissed from the porch. "She looks half dead." "Got the look of one o' them soiled doves," a man muttered. "Rode hard and put away wet." Quote. Eli ignored them. Solitude was full of small people with big mouths. The ride to the ranch was quiet. The wagon creaked, the horses snorted, the cold bit deep. Eli tried once to speak, pointing to a ridge where the snow drifted deep in winter, but she only nodded, eyes fixed ahead. Her hands were clenched in her lap, white-knuckled, unmoving. She didn't look like a woman starting over. She looked like one waiting for something terrible to happen. When they reached the cabin, Eli opened the door, and the warmth from the stove spilled out. She stopped just inside, taking in the clean pine floor, the small table, the single window that looked out over endless hills. "It's sufficient," she whispered. The words were almost soundless. He nodded. "Your room's back there. The kitchen's through that door. The necessaries out back." She gave another small nod. That night, they ate stew and cornbread at the table, silent but not uncomfortable. Afterward, she spoke for the first time at length. "Sir," she began, eyes on her hands. "Eli," he corrected gently. "If it pleases you, I'll call you sir. It's more appropriate." She straightened her back, her tone calm but distant. "I will not enter your room, and I ask that you not enter mine. I will rise before you and have breakfast ready. I'll do my chores and keep to my work. I ask for nothing but my keep." Eli studied her face. This wasn't a wife speaking. It was someone who'd spent a long time surviving and had learned to draw invisible lines for safety. "As you wish, Clara," he said softly. And so it began. Days passed. Clara kept her word. She worked from dawn to dusk, cooking, cleaning, mending. She was silent as snowfall, precise in every movement. But Eli noticed small things. She startled at sudden noises. She always kept her back to the wall. If he entered a room quietly, she froze, once even grabbing a knife before realizing it was him. Her eyes would go blank for a moment, then return to the present. The scars of her story weren't written on paper. They were in her movements, her silences, the way she looked at doors. Eli didn't ask. He just made sure his boots scuffed the floorboards before entering any room, so she'd always hear him coming. Still, one bitter December afternoon, he learned more than words could ever tell. A sudden squall swept down from the mountains, sending the horses in the corral into a frenzy. Their panicked cries filled the air. When Eli looked toward the cabin, the door was wide open, and Clara stood barefoot in the snow. Her eyes were locked on the tree line. Her face was empty, frozen with terror. The wind whipped her skirts, but she didn't move. Eli crossed the yard fast, wrapping his heavy coat around her shoulders. She gasped like she'd been yanked from a nightmare, her breath sharp and shallow. He said nothing, just guided her gently back inside. When he knelt to wash her freezing feet, she sat rigid, hands gripping the chair, eyes hollow. That was the moment Eli knew. Clara Mae Brooks had not come from a life of simple hardship. She had survived something far worse. And whatever that something was, it had followed her here. The night after Clara ran into the snow, the cabin fell into a heavy, uneasy quiet. The fire crackled, the wind moaned at the eaves, and the only sound between them was the occasional clink of Eli's spoon against his coffee mug. She sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the table. The bruising cold had faded from her skin, but something deeper still held her captive. Eli didn't ask what had scared her. He just said softly, "Storm's past. I fixed the shutter so it won't bang again." She looked up then, just briefly. "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but the way she said them, fragile, uncertain, told him it might have been a long time since anyone had done something for her without expecting a price. The next morning, he started showing her the land. "If you're going to live here," he said, pulling on his coat, "you ought to know the place." She hesitated, as if unsure whether that was an order or an invitation. Then she nodded and followed him outside. The air was sharp and clear, the snow hard underfoot. Eli led her along the fence line, through the grove of aspen where sunlight flickered like gold between white trunks. He showed her the slope behind the barn where the creek froze in winter and the small outcrop of rocks that offered shelter from the wind. "This land'll test you," he said, looking out across the empty white fields. "But if you learn it right, it'll protect you too." Clara listened. She said nothing, but her eyes followed his every gesture. When he showed her a loose panel on the back of the barn that could open to the outside, she memorized it like a map. She was learning the lay of the land the way a hunted creature learns its escape routes. It made him wonder who or what she'd been running from. A few days later, he found out more. One of the horses, a bay mare named Daisy, had cut her flank on a nail. The wound was bleeding when Eli led her into the barn. He grabbed a bucket of warm water, some rags, and a bit of carbolic soap. The horse danced nervously, tossing her head and stamping the dirt. "It's all right, girl," he murmured, trying to calm her. Then Clara appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, silent as always. Eli didn't think she'd come closer, but she did. She walked toward the horse, her steps careful. Then she reached out her hand, palm up. "Easy now," she whispered. Her voice changed, low, soft, full of something Eli hadn't heard before. The mare's ears twitched forward. She sniffed Clara's hand, then lowered her head. Clara began to hum. A low tune without words, just a sound of calm and safety. Eli watched, spellbound, as the frightened animal relaxed completely under her touch. He cleaned and bandaged the wound while Clara held the horse still, her other hand stroking the animal's face with slow, steady movements. When they were done, she stepped back, wiping her hands on her skirt. Her face was pale but peaceful. "You've got a gift," Eli said quietly. She blinked as if she didn't understand. "It's nothing," she murmured. But he could tell it was everything. For a few minutes she'd forgotten to be afraid. The next time he saw her bare arms, he understood more of the truth. It was wash day. The sun was out, the wind mild for winter. Clara had her sleeves rolled up, scrubbing shirts at the basin near the well. Eli came back from the woodpile and froze mid-step. Her arms, thin and white from years without sunlight, were covered in scars, not the kind a woman got from work or accidents. These were cruel, twisted marks, old and deep. Some were thin like scratches. Others were wider, rough, and jagged. They crisscrossed from wrist to elbow. Eli felt something dark and hot coil inside him. Rage, the kind that made his jaw clench until his teeth hurt. Whoever had done this hadn't just hurt her, they'd branded her. He wanted to ask, to demand the name of the man responsible, to hunt him down and end it. But he looked at her face, calm, focused, pretending she didn't notice him standing there. To acknowledge those scars would be to shame her, so he carried the wood inside and said nothing. But that night, when the wind started howling again, he lay awake and promised himself he'd never let anyone hurt her again. A few nights later, that promise was tested. It began with a loose shutter banging in the storm. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, like fists on a door. Thump, thump, thump. Eli woke with a start. Before he could rise, he heard another sound, the faint squeak of the front door opening. He grabbed his rifle and rushed out. The wind slapped him hard, snow-biting at his face. Then he saw her footprints, small and frantic, leading straight to the barn. Inside, Clara was crouched in an empty stall, her arms around her knees, shaking. Her whole body quivered like a trapped bird's. Eli set the rifle aside and knelt near her. He didn't touch her right away. He just said softly, "It's me. You're safe." She didn't respond. He took off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched, but didn't pull away. So he stayed there beside her, in the cold and dark, the wind screaming through the cracks. He didn't speak. He didn't try to reason with her fear. He just stayed. By dawn, the storm had died. Her sobs had quieted to small, ragged breaths. And when she finally looked up at him, her eyes were red but clear. For the first time, he saw gratitude in them. That morning, he sat at the table long after she'd gone to her room, pen and paper before him. He wrote to an old Army friend, Sergeant Thomas McCabe, who worked with the U.S. Scouts. The letter was careful, vague. He asked about rumors of men moving women across state lines, about names whispered in the darker corners of Kansas City or New Orleans. He didn't write Clara's name. He didn't need to. As winter deepened, life settled into a rhythm again. But something had shifted. The silence between them was softer now. She began leaving his meals on the table instead of retreating at once. Sometimes, she lingered long enough for their eyes to meet. When he said thank you, she would nod, just a tiny tilt of her head. But it meant something. Then came the blizzard. It rolled down from the mountains without warning, erasing the world in white. For 2 days, they were trapped inside, the walls groaning under the weight of snow. On the second night, Eli looked up from his chair and saw her slumped over the kitchen table, asleep. Her head rested on her folded arms, the lamplight soft on her face. She looked young, almost childlike. He hesitated, then lifted her gently into his arms. She didn't wake. He laid her on the old sofa near the fire, covering her with a quilt, and that's when he saw it, just below her jawline, in the hollow of her neck, a faint mark, the yellowed remains of an old bruise, oval-shaped, like a thumbprint. His blood ran cold. He understood now. The fear, the scars, the running barefoot into the snow. It all led back to one truth. Someone had claimed her once, not as a wife, not even as a woman, but as a possession. And she had escaped, but the man who left that mark might still be looking for her. When Clara woke, she found herself on the sofa, the fire, low but warm, a quilt tucked around her. Eli sat in his chair across from her, half asleep, boots still on, his rifle leaned against the wall within reach. He hadn't left her side all night. The bruise on her neck throbbed, a ghost of a past that never stayed buried. She lifted her hand to cover it, but it was too late. His eyes were open now, watching her with quiet understanding. He didn't speak of what he'd seen. He just said, "Coffee's hot." The simple kindness nearly undid her. Her hands shook as she took the cup, the heat seeping into her palms. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was waiting, open, like a space that begged for truth. "My name isn't Clara May Brooks," she said softly. "It's Clara May Stevenson." Eli didn't move, didn't even blink. "All right," he said. "Tell me." She stared into the fire, her voice flat, the way people speak when they've told a story too many times in their heads. "My family had a farm in Kansas. One night, men came. They wanted horses, money. My father tried to stop them. He didn't live to see morning." Her breath trembled. "They took me, sold me in Kansas City, to a man who sold girls downriver. I ended up in New Orleans, in a house with red curtains and locked doors. They gave me another name, Lily." Eli's jaw tightened, the tendons in his neck standing out like cords. His voice was rough. "How long?" 2 years, she whispered, "until one night the man who bought me drank too much and forgot to lock the door. I ran. I didn't stop running until I saw the mountains. I saw your advertisement in a post office in Arkansas. You asked for a woman who could work. That's all I could be." She finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Now you know the truth. You can send me away." Eli rose and crossed the small space between them. He knelt down so their eyes were level. "You listen to me, Clara," he said, his voice low and certain. "What those men did is their sin. It's not yours. You don't carry their filth. You hear me?" A single tear slipped down her cheek. He took her trembling hands in his. "This land, this home, it's yours now. No one will ever hurt you here. That's my word." She tried to speak, but her voice broke on a whisper. "What if they find me?" Eli's expression hardened. "Then they'll find a man named Thorne standing between them and you, and only one of us will be walking away." It was a vow, quiet but fierce, and it rooted itself deep in both their souls. From that night on, something changed. The distance between them began to close. She no longer avoided his eyes. She sat at the table with him instead of retreating to the kitchen. And one evening, when she forgot to bring the salt, their hands brushed as she passed it to him. She flinched but didn't pull away. A small thing. Yet it was everything. Days passed. The snow melted. The thaw came slow, but it came. Eli taught her to shoot, the same rifle that once frightened her. Her first shot missed by a mile, but he made her try again and again, until one day the tin can flew from the fence post with a sharp ping. She lowered the gun, eyes wide in disbelief, and for the first time he saw her smile. It was faint, fleeting, but real. When the next storm came, they rode together to check the fence line. The sky turned black fast. the wind rising with a wild, sudden fury. Snow came thick, blinding. They found shelter in an old line shack, a rough cabin barely big enough for two. By nightfall, the fire was dying, and the cold pressed in like a living thing. They huddled together under thin wool blankets, their breath misting in the freezing air. Clara shivered uncontrollably. Eli pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her to share what warmth he could. She trembled, not from the cold, but from the nearness. His hand brushed against her back, and he felt the ridges of scars beneath the fabric. Long, cruel lines carved deep into her skin. He froze, his heart breaking all over again. She held her breath, waiting for him to recoil. Instead, he laid his palm flat against her back, covering the scars. "You're safe," he whispered. She let out a sound, half sob, half sigh, and turned toward him. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "Do you still want me?" she asked, the words small and terrified. Knowing all this, quote, Eli pressed his forehead to hers. "I only want you when you want yourself," he murmured. "Not before, not ever without that." Her tears fell freely now. He held her through the night as the storm raged outside, the world frozen, while two broken souls thawed each other in silence. They returned home 2 days later, hollow-eyed but forever changed. From that moment, their love was not built on pity but on truth. Weeks passed, then months. The past didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled her. The town still whispered, until one day Eli rode into solitude with Clara beside him, hand in hand. Every eye turned, some with scorn, others with awe. Agnes Miller dropped her broom when she saw Clara's chin lift high. From that day forward, no one dared speak against her again. But peace in the West was always fragile. One morning, Eli received a letter meant for the sheriff, left for him by mistake. It was from a man in Cheyenne, a name he recognized from Clara's trembling lips, Martin Beauclair. He claimed ownership of a runaway girl named Lily, claimed he had a bill of sale, claimed she was his property. Eli's blood turned to fire. He didn't burn the letter. He put it on the mantel like a declaration of war. 2 days later, the sheriff came riding up with that same paper in hand. "Eli," he said, his voice uneasy. "This man's comin'. He's got legal documents." Quote, Clara stepped onto the porch, pale but steady. "I'll go," she said quietly. "I won't let anyone else die for me." Eli moved between her and the sheriff. "No," he said, calm but cold as steel. "She's my wife. This is her home. You'll not take her from it." The sheriff swallowed hard. "You'll be breaking the law, Thorne." "Then the law is wrong," Eli said, his voice flat as stone. The next day in town, the saloon became a courtroom. Beauclair stood in his fine coat, waving his bill of sale. "She's mine by contract," he sneered. "She's a runaway thief." Eli rose slowly, his voice low but carrying across the room. "Her name is Clara May Stevenson Thorne," he said. "She's a free woman, a survivor. And I dare you to look her in the eyes and tell her she's property." He told them her story of the raid, the riverboat, the house with locked doors. The room fell silent. The judge listened, his hand trembling slightly as he read the document. Then he looked up. "Mr. Beauclair," the judge said, voice hard as a gavel. "This paper means nothing. Not here. Not in this country. A war was fought over this. It's over. This woman is free." He tore the bill of sale in half, then in half again. The crowd erupted. Clara covered her face, sobbing. Eli took her hand, holding it tight, as the weight of years lifted from her shoulders. A few months later, on a windswept bluff overlooking their ranch, they stood hand in hand again, this time before a small circle of friends. The judge himself married them properly under the wide Wyoming sky. "I was broken when I met you," Eli said, voice thick with emotion. "But you showed me how to live again." Clara smiled through her tears. "You gave me back my name, my life, my freedom." When he slid the simple leather ring onto her finger, the wind carried her laughter across the meadow like music. Seasons passed. The land healed, and so did they. Clara opened a small school on their porch for the ranchers, children, white, freedmen's daughters, and Arapaho alike. Her voice, once stolen, now filled the air with warmth and purpose. Years later, when the first wildflowers returned to the hills, she told Eli she was expecting their child, and when their daughter was born, they named her Hope. Because that was what survived every storm.